The cold hit Tara Osimensa the moment she stepped off the transport, and she decided it was the most honest thing the city had offered her all week. Chicago, in December, the lake wind had teeth. The sky over the lakefront was that particular shade of bruised gray that she associated with her childhood. With her mother's hands around a mug of cocoa, with the tinny speaker in the kitchen, pumping out something her mom called a classic. She'd been 11 the last time she'd stood in this city, and felt nothing but ordinary. She was 23 now and wearing a uniform that hadn't existed 3 years ago, and the shape of the skyline had changed just enough to remind her that everything had. The Bouve habitat floated half a kilometer above Grant Park, the way it always did. A flattened disk of pale polymer architecture, glowing faintly amber from its interior lights, tethered to the ground by 16 transit cables that the city had tastefully disguised to look like enormous tinsel-wrapped poles. The Chicago Tourism Board had done their best. You had to give them that. Her earpiece buzzed. Osimensa. You read? Loud and clear, Lieutenant. Integration Liaison Office wants the report filed before 1700. Something happened up in the habitat. Something about The lieutenant paused, and she could hear him reading off a screen. A hot beverage incident. That's what the Bouve translator rendered it as. Hot beverage incident. Understood. Tara pulled her coat tighter and started walking toward the transit cable base. I'll go up and see what the hot beverage incident is. She'd been doing this for 14 months. Earth Bouve Integration Liaison, which was a title invented by a committee of diplomats who needed something to put on a badge that didn't have the word babysitter in it. She spoke enough Bouve phonics to make them laugh, which apparently mattered more than her clearance level. She'd once diffused a 3-hour standoff over a misclassified piece of recycled material. The Bouve had attempted to categorize all human hats as protective head-dwelling units, and confiscated 600 of them from a Christmas market before anyone noticed, simply by demonstrating to the Bouve Council that the objects were also used recreationally. She'd done this by putting one on her head and doing a small, undignified dance. The Bouve had found this extremely compelling. She rode the transit cable up in a pod the size of a cargo elevator, watching the city shrink below her. The habitat smelled, when the doors opened, like something between a chemistry lab and a holiday candle someone had left burning too long. She stepped out onto the main residential terrace, and immediately understood what the hot beverage incident was. There was chocolate on everything. Not a little chocolate. Chocolate as a geological event. The stuff had apparently surged out of some central processing area and traveled the full length of the east residential block before hardening into a slow, dark wave that had set against the polymer wall like an exhibit in a confectionery museum. 3 Bouve were perched on top of the wave, color cycling through shades of embarrassed magenta, and a 4th was using a device that looked like a spatula attached to a leaf blower to scrape sections of it loose. At the center of the disaster, sitting on an overturned fabrication bin and looking at his feet with the particular posture of someone who has recently understood exactly what they did wrong, was O. Tara had known O for 14 months. She had come to understand that his earnestness was not a performance, that his enthusiasms were genuine and total and borderline catastrophic, and that the space between his intentions and their outcomes was precisely wide enough to fit, say, a hot beverage incident. She walked over and sat down beside him on a second fabrication bin. So, she said. It is the Christmas, O said. I was attempting the Christmas. How much cocoa did you make? O held up 4 fingers, then reconsidered, then held up what Tara interpreted as the Bouve equivalent of the gesture meaning a lot. Did you drink any of it? I was tasting the first batch. He held up a small container. It was, she noticed, a container she had given him last week. A thermos with a worn-out graphic of a cardinal on it that had been her mother's. He'd been carrying it around. She hadn't asked why. Did you taste the second batch? The second batch was when the incident occurred. Tara looked out across the chocolate landscape. A small Bouve child, what she thought was a child, the Bouve were difficult to age at a glance, had found a large piece of hardened chocolate and was riding it down the slight incline of the terrace floor with evident joy. She felt something loosen in her chest. Oh, she said. Can I ask you something? You may ask many somethings. I will answer with the correctness. What do you think Christmas is? He thought about it seriously. The color in his skin shifted. The Bouve communicated emotion through bioluminescent pigment shifts, and Tara had learned to read them roughly the way she'd learned to read weather. Imprecisely, but well enough to know when something was coming. Right now his pigments said something between uncertainty and the desire to get the answer right. It is the season of the giving, he said, and of the togetherness, and of the special food which I have now also made too much of, and of the singing, and of the specific decorated plant which must not be consumed. He paused. I told Yort it must not be consumed. Yort consumed it anyway. The tree, Yort was fine. He has a very strong secondary stomach. She almost smiled. You're not wrong about Christmas. You got the main parts. But I did a bad explanation to the others, he said. I told them and they went to give things to the humans, and it was not the correct giving. His pigment darkened. I watched from up here. They were throwing the gifts. One of them went into a ditch. Yeah, she said. I got that report. I wanted for them to understand. The thing you showed me, when your mother used to make the cocoa and you would sit and just be together. I wanted for them to have that thing. Tara was quiet for a moment. She'd told O about her mother one evening in October, when the habitat had experienced a power fluctuation, and she'd been stranded up here for 6 hours while maintenance sorted it out. O had asked about her thermos, the cardinal thermos, why she kept it when the rubber seal had long since failed and it didn't actually keep anything warm anymore. And she'd told him. She hadn't meant to go as deep as she went, but O had this quality, an absolute undistracted attention that felt like being handed a gift yourself, and she'd found herself describing the apartment kitchen on Halstead, the small tree with the ornaments that were mostly handmade, the smell of her mother's red beans and rice drifting in from the other room, and the particular quality of that silence, the warm blanket silence of late December, when you were somewhere safe and loved, and the world outside the window was doing its cold gray thing without you. You told them about the sitting together, she said. I told them about the cocoa, he said, but I may have focused heavily on the production aspect. She looked at the chocolate wave. You think? He made a sound she'd come to understand as a boov laugh. A low percussive chirp, and she found herself laughing too. Not the polite professional laugh she'd developed for integration liaison meetings, but an actual laugh, the kind that lived in the stomach. Okay, she said. Then let's fix it. She stood up. She was aware, in the way that you're aware of things you've been avoiding thinking about directly, that she had nowhere to be tonight. Her mother had been gone 2 years. She had 2 colleagues who were technically friends, and a studio apartment with a very small tree she'd bought at a bodega. She had no particular plans. She also had, right now, roughly 300 boov who had just experienced the Christmas equivalent of reading a Wikipedia article about music, and then trying to play a symphony. I need, she said, to borrow the Habitat broadcast system. O looked at her with the focused curiosity that she had come to understand meant he was about to cooperate fully with something he didn't yet understand. I will get you the microphone, he said. We have 6. Yort ate one of them, but we have the other 5. The broadcast system was a repurposed boov long-range signal array that the integration team had quietly converted into something more like a public address system. It could reach every terrace and module in the habitat, and with the external speakers engaged, it could also reach the transit cable base and the immediate park below. Tara had used it twice before, once to announce a Reachgelden maintenance window, and once to talk down a boov who had misunderstood a street performer and believed the city was being invaded by silver robots. She stood in the communications module, which was a circular room, with walls that glowed softly in the ambient gold of boov interior lighting, and she looked at the signal array transmitter for a moment before she picked it up. She thought about what she wanted to say. She thought about her mother's kitchen, the cardinal thermos, the smell of red beans and rice. Then she pressed the transmit key and started talking. Hey, she said. This is Tara. Most of you know me. For those who don't, I'm the human who comes up here and answers questions and occasionally does the small dance with the hat. I want to talk to you for a few minutes about Christmas, because I think there's been a miscommunication, and I think it's my fault as much as anyone's. Static. Then, through the module's monitoring speakers, she could hear the terrace outside go quiet. Christmas is not about the gifts. I mean, it is a little. There are gifts. But the gift part isn't the point. The point is the feeling that the gifts are supposed to carry. The feeling of saying, I thought about you. I know what you like. I know what makes you feel less alone. She paused. That's the part O got right. He told you about sitting together, about making something warm and sharing it. That's the core of it. She could see O through the module's small viewport window, standing on the terrace. His pigment was cycling through something she didn't have a name for, something in the range of moved. The thing is, she said, you don't have to understand the whole history of it to do the actual thing. Christmas, the real part of Christmas, is not that complicated. It's just this. You look at the people around you, and you think about what would make them feel seen. You think about what they need that they maybe can't give themselves. And then you give them that thing, or you make that thing, or you just sit with them so they're not alone while they figure out how to ask for it. She stopped. Outside the city was starting to come on. The streetlights along Michigan Avenue flicking to life in the early dark. Down below in the park she could see, just barely, people, old hot dogs and bundled children, and the lit windows of the apartments across the street. I'm going to be honest, she said. I'm talking to you about Christmas because I needed to hear it myself. I have been doing this job for over a year, and I have been very professional and very competent. And I have not once, in all that time, let myself just. She looked out the viewport at the city, sit in it, the warm part. Because it's harder to do when you're doing it alone. She cleared her throat, so, if any of you would like to have cocoa with me tonight, and there is already a lot of cocoa available, I would consider that a successful Christmas. She set the transmitter down. She stood very still for a moment in the golden light of the communications module. Then the terrace door opened and O came in. He was carrying the cardinal thermos. I found the seal part in the fabrication catalog, he said. I made you a new one. It will now keep things warm for 11 hours, which is 33% more than the advertised original specification. He held it out to her. I thought about what you like. I know what makes you feel less alone. She took the thermos. She held it for a moment without saying anything, because the truth was that she didn't trust her voice right then. And the other truth was that she didn't have to say anything. O understood silence the way she'd taught him, as a complete sentence with a warm meaning. Okay, she said finally. Let's go make the Christmas. What followed was not elegant. The booth of the habitat had, in the hours since O's initial broadcast, been operating on their partial and tangled understanding of the holiday, which meant the residential terraces currently featured. A tree assembled from plumbing components, decorated with the things the booth had been able to identify as shiny and therefore good, which included but was not limited to a collection of circuit boards, several reflective emergency blankets cut into strips, and what appeared to be every button anyone in the habitat owned, a snow simulation using fabricated polymer flakes that were aerodynamically inert and would, Tara understood, be settling on every surface in the habitat for approximately the next 3 days, and a singing arrangement being performed by a group of 7 booth who had listened to Tara's original explanation of carols and interpreted it as harmonic hollering, which was technically accurate if you generalized aggressively. She walked through all of it with O at her shoulder and she thought, this is the most alien place I have ever stood, and I have never felt more at home. There was a moment, she would remember it later with the particular clarity that only certain moments earn, the ones that are doing more than one thing at once. When they came around the corner of the East Residential Terrace and found a group of booth children attempting to construct a snow person out of the polymer flakes. The flakes were too light to compact. The booth children were not deterred. They had, with the problem-solving instinct that Tara had come to understand, was one of the genuinely extraordinary things about this species, fabricated a wire armature and were applying the flakes to it systematically, building their snow person from the inside out. And the result was, there was no other word for it, beautiful, fragile and improbable and beautiful, held together by the logic of creatures who had never seen snow before, and therefore had no reason to believe it should work any differently than this. She stood and looked at it. Oh, stood beside her and looked at it. They have made the snow structure person, he said. Yeah. It is not anatomically consistent with a human. I count 3 heads. It has 3 heads, she agreed. It's still perfect. He considered this. His pigment shifted to something she could only describe as warmly baffled. I do not understand why the number of heads is not important. Because they made it, she said. They made it themselves, with no instructions, using materials they had, because they wanted to. That's the part that matters. She looked at the 3-headed snow structure standing in the shimmer of the polymer flakes and the amber habitat light, and she thought about her mother's handmade ornaments, the ones with the slightly uneven edges where the craft scissors had wandered. And she thought about the cardinal thermos now warm in her hands with its new seal, and she thought, this is how traditions start. Someone does a thing imperfectly because they love someone else, and then the imperfect thing becomes the thing. And 20 years later, their kid is standing in a floating alien habitat above Lake Michigan, thinking about it with a tightness in her chest that is not grief, or not only grief, but also something else. something that wears grief's clothes sometimes because they're all made of the same material. Oh, she said. You know what you got right? The cocoa. The cocoa. And the part about bringing it to people who didn't have it. The Boov have never had Christmas, and now they're making it their own. That's exactly what the holiday is supposed to do. That's what every tradition does when it works. It travels, it changes shape, it picks up new heads. Oh, thought about this. I have a new question about the heads. The heads are a metaphor. Ah, a pause. I also have a question about the metaphor. She turned to look at him. In the amber light of the habitat, with the polymer flakes drifting and the three-headed snow structure standing sentinel behind him, and the harmonic hollering just audible from 2 terraces over, he looked exactly like what he was. A completely alien being doing his absolute best to understand something that did not come naturally to him. Out of nothing but affection for someone who had thought it was worth explaining. She thought, this is the job, this has always been the job. Not the reports and the incident management and the diplomatic buffer zone maintenance. This. Standing here with someone who doesn't understand your traditions and watching them make those traditions into something new. And finding that the new thing is not a lesser version, but a different version. And understanding that different versions are how the thing survives. The metaphor, she said, is that traditions are not instructions. They're more like recipes where you don't have all the ingredients, so you use what you have, and sometimes it's different from the original, and sometimes it's better. I understand recipes, O said. I made the cocoa from a recipe. I know you did. I may have tripled the recipe. You tripled it several times. I was enthusiastic. You were, she said. That's the other part of Christmas, actually. The enthusiasm. You don't do it small. Below them, the city was all lit up. From the terrace, she could see the arc of the lakefront, the trees in the park with their lights, the long bright slash of Michigan Avenue, and beyond it the darkness of the lake itself, flat and cold and going on forever. She could see the Ferris wheel at Navy Pier spinning its slow cold circle. She could see the apartment windows, dozens of them, hundreds of them, each one a small lit square that meant someone was home. She thought about her studio apartment, the small bodega tree, the single string of lights she'd wound around it in a spiral that wasn't quite even. She thought, I could go back to that tonight. I have filed the report. The hot beverage incident has been assessed and documented. The Integration Liaison Office will receive a very professional account of what happened here. Or, oh, she said, do you want to hear some actual carols? I know a few. I'm not a great singer. I would like this very much, he said immediately. I have been told by several Boov that the harmonic hollering on Terrace 4 is not historically accurate. It's not, she confirmed. They will want to compare. Then let's go give them something to compare it to. She didn't have a plan. She had a thermos and a coat and a mediocre singing voice and 14 months of knowing this species well enough to understand that they responded to genuine effort the way all beings respond to genuine effort. With the particular gratitude of creatures who recognize a gift that costs something, she walked back toward Terrace 4, and she started to sing. She sang her mother's version of O Holy Night, which was slower than the standard version, and had a note in the bridge that was technically wrong, but had always sounded right. And she sang it into the amber habitat air, with the polymer flakes settling around her, and the Boov gathering in their dozens to listen, their pigments cycling through spectra she was still learning the names for. And she thought, this is what the feeling is. Not the cocoa or the gifts or the decorated plant or even the harmonic hollering, but this. The willingness to stand somewhere unfamiliar and offer the thing you love most, knowing it will land differently than you intended, and trusting that different is okay. When she finished, there was a silence that lasted long enough to be its own kind of sound. Then O began to clap. He was not doing it correctly. The Boov did not have the same hand geometry as humans. But he was doing it with a completeness of commitment that made the form irrelevant. One by one the others joined him, in their own rhythms, some fast and some slow, and some in complex polyrhythmic patterns that she suspected were very technically sophisticated tributes, even though they sounded like a moderate rainstorm on a tin roof. That said, oh, was the Christmas. Yeah, she said. That was the Christmas. Later, much later, after the cocoa had been distributed in proper measured amounts, and the three-headed snow person had been given a name, the Boov named things by committee, and the result was 20 syllables long, which O translated for her as approximately the one who has more heads than expected, and is considered auspicious, and the harmonic hollering had been refined into something that was arguably its own musical tradition. And was, she thought, genuinely pretty good. She sat on the railing of the outer terrace with the cardinal thermos in her hands and looked at the city below. O sat beside her. He had found, somewhere in the habitat, a length of the reflective emergency blanket material and fashioned it around his shoulders in a way that he had clearly intended as a coat, and which, she noted, actually worked. He sat in his improvised silver coat and looked at the city with her in silence. After a while he said, Tara, yeah, next year, when the Christmas comes again, may I make the cocoa again? She thought about it. Yes, she said. But we're going to do portions. We're going to talk about portions before you start. I understand portions, he said. Portions are the amounts. The amounts, yes. I will do the correct amounts. She looked at him. He was watching the Ferris wheel at Navy Pier turning its slow, cold circle, and his pigment was the particular settled gold that she had come to understand meant something like contentment, or the Bouve equivalent of contentment, which she suspected was richer and stranger than the human version, and also involved at least 2 additional emotional registers she didn't have words for. Oh, she said, yes, you did good today. He was quiet for a moment. His pigment went briefly luminous and then settled back to the gold. I made the large hot beverage incident. You also made the Christmas, she said. For 300 people who have never had it before, that's a significant accomplishment. He considered this. I made the Christmas from wrong information and excessive cocoa and an incomplete knowledge of human traditions that I have only learned from one human. That's how it's always been made, she said. That's how every version of it got made. Someone who didn't quite understand it learned what they could from whoever they loved, and then they did it anyway, and it came out different than the original, but it was still the thing. She looked out at the city. That's the whole deal. That's always been the whole deal. The Ferris wheel turned. The city lights threw their glow up into the low gray sky and turned it the color of something warm. Below them on the park path she could see a family, 2 adults, 3 children, a dog that was having strong feelings about the cold, moving in the slow, happy shuffle of people with nowhere to be that night. One of the children looked up at the habitat, the amber disk floating above the park, and waved. She waved back. She didn't know if they could see her. She waved anyway. Beside her, O raised a hand in his own version of the wave, which was more of a slow, ceremonial extension of the arm, like a flag being raised in slow motion. I am waving, he said. Is this the correct waving? There's no incorrect waving, she said. That's one of the good things about it. He extended the arm a little further, solemn and sincere and completely himself, and she thought, I have been doing this job for 14 months, and I have written 47 incident reports and attended 63 coordination meetings, and I have been, in all of that time, very professional. I have not in all of that time felt this much like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. The cold had teeth. The lake was dark. The city glowed. The Bouve's improvised carols drifted out through the habitat's exterior speakers and mixed with the sound of the wind off the water into something that was neither fully human nor fully alien, but was, she decided, its own thing entirely. Its own tradition in its first year of being, still imperfect, still finding its shape, still deciding what it was going to be. She drank from the cardinal thermos. It kept things warm for 11 hours, which was 33% more than the original specification. She thought, that's enough. That's more than enough. That, she thought, is the Christmas.